Always true.
For more than a century, the Red Cross and Red Crescent emblem has stood as a shield, a guarantee of protection in war and disaster. But today, some argue that shield is breaking. The global humanitarian system is being stripped of its lifelines. US President Donald Trump's shutdown of US aid and billions in cuts across donor countries has placed even greater pressure on the world's major NGOs, forcing them to scale back life-saving operations. This comes as the conflict in Sudan worsens, desperate Palestinian struggle in Gaza, another bitter winter hits Ukraine, and climate-driven disasters like floods, earthquakes and storms affect the world's poorest, from Asia to Africa. As humanitarian workers come under attack, funds are drying up, and the very rules meant to protect civilians in war are being shredded in plain sight. So how can the world's largest humanitarian network remain operational in this increasingly hostile environment? Jagan Chapagain, Secretary General and CEO of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, talks to Al Jazeera. Jagan Chapagain, Secretary General and Chief Executive Officer of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. Let's start with this title, because the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement has been there for a very long time. It's a huge pillar of the international system and the humanitarian system, but it's a little complex. Can you just explain to me, we've got the International Committee of the Red Cross, we've got national societies, we've got you, the IFRC, how does it all work?
Just like in the UN system, you have multiple UN agencies working together under one UN umbrella. It's a bit similar here, although we are of course much older than the UN system. So when we say Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, it's a family, but with the three distinct components. We use the word component. Family members. So we have the International Committee of the Red Cross with a very unique mandate. You know, when the Red Cross was created in 1863, that's when the ICRC was created, with the original intent to work during the war, actually helping the people, victims of war. Basically, that's how the ICRC was created.
A humanitarian role, but also they do other things related to war, like they deal with prisoners of war, detainees, negotiations between sides, tracing missing people, things like that.
Absolutely. So it started to help the victims of the war, and it evolved over a period of time with the first Geneva Convention in 1864. But along the way, many national committees were created, you know, during the First World War. Red Cross committees were created in many, many countries. So in 1919, at the same time as the creation of the League of Nations, the League of Red Cross was created, the same year. And it used to be called League of Red Cross.
So the League, that's what now is the IFRC, the body you had.
Absolutely. So these national committees came in 1919 and created a League of Red Cross Societies. And basically the idea behind that was that the number of national societies in different countries, right now 191 of them, felt that they needed a global body to provide a platform for them to come together, collaborate, and basically support each other. So these three components coming, the national societies in each of the countries, actually they do every humanitarian work in the country. They are created by act of parliament, or through a decree in the country. So it's different than the NGOs in that sense, that they are created by an act of government. And the local Red Cross, Red Crescent societies can be created only after the state has acceded to Geneva Conventions. And that's the link between the Red Cross and the government.
So are they quasi-government, these bodies?
They are not quasi-government. They are independent from the government, but the government have taken a responsibility by signing the Geneva Conventions that these organizations will be allowed to work according to the fundamental principles of the Red Cross, Red Crescent.
But how do you ensure that they always do what they're supposed to do? In the past, I've been a journalist long enough to know that there have been allegations of fraud and corruption, and sometimes criticism of political bias and interference. How do you stop those things?
No, basically, we have taken a very strong stance around the integrity issues, and that includes the issues of fraud and corruption, including the sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, discrimination, racism issues, and we don't deny the fact that they exist also in some Red Cross entities, because the Red Cross entities are also filled by the people from the same environment. But we have a very strong zero tolerance policy. First is in prevention. We invest heavily now on preventing these things from happening. But unfortunately, all the bad things could not be prevented in the world. And when it happens, we have a very strong mechanism to investigate and take action.
Well, let me give you an example, not a distant historical example, one from when you have been in charge of your organization, and that's the Syrian Red Crescent. During Syria's awful civil war, there was criticism that they were being used as a tool of the Assad government, even accusations they facilitated the arrests of patients in hospitals, and there were people involved in that organization who were not really humanitarians, they were intelligence agents. How do you deal with something like that?
Now, we need to put it in a bit broader context here. That time, if you know that most humanitarian organizations were not able to deliver humanitarian assistance, and it was the Syrian Arab Red Crescent at one point was delivering 80% of the humanitarian assistance coming to the countries, including of all the UN agencies' humanitarian assistance.
Only to the bits of Syria controlled by Assad?
Wherever they could access. There was never a point saying that we will go to only this part or not that part. That was never a policy position. But as you know, when there are front lines, to be able to cross the front lines, you need to win the trust of both sides. And whenever that trust is there, if you are allowed to cross the line, they would do it. Now, of course, to be able to do that, you need to talk to both sides. And sometimes when you talk to certain side, that is seen as complicity. And this happened in case of Syrian Arab Red Crescent. And when some of this criticism came, we did challenge the organizations to give us not just the rhetoric, but some concrete evidence we could take action around. James, I have to say that, of course, after I became Secretary General, I visited Syria and I have gone there again. During that time, the only organization who lost 72 staff and volunteers while they were delivering the aid is only Syrian Arab Red Crescent. If any other international organization had lost one staff, they would have left the country. So I think we need to put things into perspective. Now, in the middle of the conflict, the type of conflict that was going on in the country, were there few mistakes here and there? There might have been. And I will not deny that because I was not there on the ground. But when you put overall context there, so the decision needed to be made, whether that 80% of the humanitarian aid would be delivered to the people, or we say, no, because we don't want to talk to the Assad government, we will not do anything. That was the choice to be made.
Okay, well, let's move to a key part of all this, which is where you get your funding from, because we have a time right now when there's been an awful year for the humanitarian sector, that President Trump has shut USAID, the US humanitarian agency. It's estimated the US has cut as much as $13 billion in funds for humanitarian aid and international organizations, and many other countries followed suit. How has this affected you? Do you get funds directly from the US and others?
We do. Majority of our funding comes from our membership. Our membership contribute. 191 members, they contribute. Of course, the governments are major part of the source of our funding. We have diversified with the private sector and some innovative financing mechanism. The US was definitely one of our major funder, around 12% or so, 11-12% of the funding we received from the US government. Significant portion of that funding has stopped in the beginning of the year, particularly the work on climate and the community health. We have now a degree of re-engagement, and especially in some of the crises, the US has started funding, like in DRC or Bangladesh. But as you rightly mentioned, that it has impacted most organizations massively, and many countries I visit, I could see the impact. Like I was in Somalia, and in some of these rural areas where you used to have 4 or 5 organizations providing support, the health clinics and things like that. Right now, none of them are there.
Can you quantify the effect of this? I mean, how many people are dying who shouldn't die?
I would not try to quantify now because honestly, I don't have that number. Of course, there are multiple numbers that have been
but it's a big number.
That have been discussed about. I refrain from doing that because it's extremely hard to say that. Maybe except in certain camp environment, it's extremely hard to say that this person is alive because of this or this person died because it's very, very hard to say that. So I want to be careful. But what I have witnessed is the program have been shut down. The type of assistance that was going to the clinics, I visited a clinic there, had no medicines anymore. The doctors and nurses were not paid anymore. And you could see it will start having the impact. But the bigger impact, which will come a bit later in the future, is that, some of the vaccinations, for example, I saw in Somalia, the entire villages hadn't received any vaccinations. And although they had the vaccines, but they didn't have the cash to take the vaccines and actually deliver on the ground. Imagine these children not getting any vaccines. You can imagine the long-term consequences of that on their life, but also on their livelihoods and therefore future opportunities.
So when you decide now on what operations to focus on, do you need to have a political element to your decisions? I understand you've been involved in an operation on a boat called Ocean Viking in the Eastern Mediterranean, rescuing migrants at sea. I understand you're going to stop your involvement in that. Is that because migrants are such a toxic issue in European countries?
Basically, this was one of the toughest decisions I had to make to stop that program, because this was really saving lives on the sea. And we know for sure that more people will die in the Mediterranean, which is considered the biggest underwater grave in the world. Now, we have been using our core funding because programs like this have been very difficult to be funded, even before the current financial crisis. So we had been using our core resources to fund that program, to maintain that program, because for us it was too important to stop. Now, because of the funding cuts that we experienced, we had to take a decision to cut 20% of our core funding. And unfortunately, this program fell within that 20%. And it will have consequences. More people will die, absolutely no doubt on that.
Let me talk now, and let us talk now about Gaza and the death toll in the humanitarian sector. As I understand it, the figures I've got, 560 aid workers, 1,500 health workers killed, and 51 Palestinian Red Crescent staff killed since October 2023, 376 UN staff. That's the highest number in the UN's 80-year history. I mean, this is totally unacceptable. Are you pushing for accountability? The International Criminal Court already has arrest warrants out. It's not taken up the issue yet of the killing of humanitarian workers. Should it? So that this doesn't happen anywhere else?
This is absolutely unacceptable. And as you know, there are international norms which prevents the states or the parties to the conflict not to target the type of workers you just described. For the Red Cross, Red Crescent, under the Geneva Conventions, the emblem of Red Cross or Red Crescent is protected. It's actually a legal framework that exists in the world. And this year alone, we've lost 25, but not only in Gaza. We've lost in Sudan. On October 7th, we lost 6 of them in Israel. In Iran, we lost 5 of them. So this has happened in multiple countries now, and it's sort of a sense of impunity has
When you talk about that emblem, as you say, it's supposed to be a symbol to signify protection. Do you think in some cases, including in Gaza, when your ambulances have been hit, that actually they've looked at that emblem and deliberately targeted you?
Clearly, the protective value of the emblem has eroded over a period of time, and this has been a big, big concern for us. And of course, from the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, we have also joined forces with the other organizations to bring this issue on the fore. So we have to continue to work in a systematic way. And the states has the number one responsibility. But at the same time, as I'm talking to Al Jazeera now, I also believe that the media has a very, very important responsibility. One thing that is missing on the statistics, James, is that 96% of the humanitarian workers who have been killed have been the local staff or local volunteers. And in the international media, when an international humanitarian worker gets killed, of course, it's terrible. And when a local staff gets killed, the media coverage ratio is 500 to 1. When the local gets killed, it doesn't become the news, and majority of them were local. And this is, I think, one important role the media play, that every humanitarian kill must be unacceptable and must be highlighted at the same level as we do for the internationals.
I can agree with you, but it would be hard to do so given the numbers that were killed in Gaza. Now, in October, President Trump hailed a 28-point peace plan for Gaza. But the reality is there's just a shaky ceasefire, and every day Israel is still bombing. What's your view of the situation on the ground now? How bad is it still? Because a lot of the media are not really reporting on it. They think it's a closed case, it's finished. And is enough aid getting in?
No, the humanitarian situation in Gaza still remains very, very bad. And as you know, even after conflict is over, the humanitarian situation becomes actually worse for a period of time before it starts getting better. But at the moment, of course, this is not yet over, and there are attacks happening right now. The infrastructure, the health infrastructure was near collapse, the education system, the water system, the fuel shortage, everything. So you cannot just change that, even with the degree of ceasefire that is happening now. So the situation is still terrible. Clearly, the more aid is coming in than before, no doubt on that. But is it enough? Absolutely not. It's nowhere enough. And now, the worst thing is the winter is coming. It gets very, very cold. The people have to spend their nights in very, very cold environment. And with the extremely weakened health infrastructure. So the humanitarian situation is still catastrophic. And the only solution is to have a permanent ceasefire and the end of hostilities. Until that happens, I think the suffering will continue. Now, big element of Gaza, even before the October 7th, has been that the humanitarian assistance had come before. But the commercial activities, resumption of commercial activities is the only way of sustaining quality of life in Gaza. And with the current security environment, of course, the commercial activities cannot start.
As you say, even before October the 7th, the humanitarian situation in Gaza was a concern, and it was not a normal place because a Palestinian state has not been allowed by the international community. Education and healthcare to an extent was provided by the UN and UNRWA, and the Palestinian Red Crescent played a really vital role.
Very vital role.
In effect, among other things, they were the ambulance service of Gaza. Yet, so many of those vehicles are destroyed. Can that role still be performed?
They still continue to perform, by the way. Majority of their the vehicles were damaged, but we managed to replenish some of those vehicles. And
but is it a problem? For example, a pregnant woman having to go to hospital, is it still problematic?
I mean, it is still possible, but it's still problematic because the lack of fuel, damage of infrastructure, and of course the moving nature of the country, it makes it still difficult. But they never stopped operating. They never stopped operating the hospitals they have, and actually in early this year they started the sort of the mobile hospitals because the populations were moving.
Have they got freedom of movement? There's this yellow line with Israel still occupying more than half of the Gaza Strip. Can they go across that if they want?
But it requires negotiation, and sometimes they can, sometimes they cannot. And that's the part, we go back to the Syria situation, that to be able to do that, you've got to talk to the people who control the front line. And somehow that should not always be seen as being complicit. It's part of a negotiation.
Move to Sudan, where the war continues to rage. Appalling massacres have taken place in Darfur. Does it concern you that this is so low on the global radar in terms of the media, but also in terms of governments?
It's simply not getting attention from the political level, from the funding level, from the media coverage level, and the number of deaths and the instruments that are being used to kill civilians, displace civilians, is horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. And some organizations like the Sudanese Red Crescent, they are present in every state, even today. Our appeal is less than 20% funded. Getting funding for Sudan has been extremely difficult, even in a situation where we can do much, much more than what we are doing at the moment. So from all sides, Sudan has been really a difficult context. And for people there, heart breaks.
Another place that you are active is helping with humanitarian efforts as an effect of the war in Ukraine. And interestingly, there's a Red Cross in Ukraine and a Red Cross in Russia. Does that create some complexities that you're on both sides? For example, when Russia has taken territory, occupied territory, do the Russian Red Cross or the Ukraine Red Cross go there? Because if it's Eastern Ukraine or Crimea and it's the Russian Red Cross, then surely that is a breach of the sovereignty of Ukraine.
The one unique nature of us has been having the Red Cross on both sides. You know, North Korea, South Korea, we have Red Crosses in both countries. And actually, we come together in the same room and discuss humanitarian issues, taking the politics out.
Yeah, but there is a clear DMZ between those two. In Ukraine, Russia's taken territory. Isn't that problematic?
Yeah. No, let me come to that. But the point I was making is that actually having national societies on both sides actually is generally a good thing. We can get the humanitarian assistance in a balanced manner on both sides of the people affected, because for us, the humanitarian needs drives our decision. Of course, in this particular aspect of ongoing conflict, where certain territories are controlled by a certain party to the conflict, of course, it makes it very, very complicated. And the situation is not resolved. The politically is not resolved. And the challenge here, James, is, and this is, I do get this question also with from people in power. I say, the problem is not the Red Cross. The problem is the parties fighting and the global system's inability to find political solutions.
But to be clear, if I was to find the Red Cross in Crimea, it would be the Russian Red Cross in occupied Ukraine.
If it is defined as occupied territory under the Geneva Conventions, the occupying force has a responsibility to look after the population. In this case, this is not even clear. It's not agreed that these are considered occupied territory, and it makes it even more complicated. So the position we have taken is that in each of these territories, there used to be the Red Cross units before the conflict started. These units continue to do what they can do with the limited ability for them to function because the war continues. And I think the final settlement will only be possible once there is a geopolitical settlement. We don't have neither power nor authority to decide which territory belongs to whom. That has to be a geopolitical solution.
Okay, let's move on to another great part of your work, which is dealing with natural disasters. Devastating floods in South and Southeast Asia, major earthquake in Afghanistan, catastrophic monsoon in Pakistan, severe floods in Cape Verde. One word, what's the thing linking them?
Climate.
Okay, then how do you deal with the fact that key global leaders do not accept that? President Trump says climate change is the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. He says it's a hoax and a scam. When you have someone who is as powerful as that, whose words reverberate like that, how do you convince the world that climate change is such a devastating problem?
Clearly, the changing politics makes some of this work harder, no doubt on that. But for us in the IFRC, and thank you for bringing the topic here, because now we are coming to our mandate as IFRC. So it's my more comfort zone, let me put it this way. But what is undeniable is the impact. More heat killing people, 500,000 people get killed by extreme heat. And it's mostly in developed world. You cannot deny that. It's fact, it's coming from the same countries, statisticians. The number of floods, cyclones, the severity, the impact they are having, it's growing. And you cannot deny that. It's displacing more people. Climate-related disasters are displacing more people in number than by conflict. And these are facts. So while there can be continuing political debate on whether climate crisis is happening or not, what is undeniable is the impact are growing, they are getting worse, more people are displaced, more people are dying. And we do have this conversation very, very honestly. And it's become harder, absolutely no doubt on that. But we still have people who agree with us. Now, the one very important shift we are making, and it's also linked to your earlier question on the financing issue, has been also that how do we strengthen, because of the nature of our network, where we have 191 countries working in their one context, we are also increasingly shifting our focus on mobilizing resources in country, not focusing purely on parachuting the international assistance, while international assistance and solidarity is still needed. And last number of years, we have invested heavily on that, and our new renewal strategy, which we have just launched, is focusing much more on that and promoting more the neighboring, of course, in-country solidarity, neighboring country solidarity. And when we go like that, we get much better support. For example, the current flooding that's happening in Southeast Asia, we are getting much better support from the countries in the regions, including a country like Australia. We have now countries like Thailand donating, which they didn't do it before. So we are also shifting our strategy to more diversify how we mobilize resources in these countries, and also diversify the let's say the power of influence, and probably not focusing on the same countries as we have been doing for many, many years. And it's harder, no doubt on that. It takes much more effort, no doubt on that. But I believe that this is the strategy we have to pursue. So it becomes the issue for all the countries and not only for few.
Jagan Chapagain, Secretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you for having me.